Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to watercolor some koi 3 different ways. I'm going to be using 3 different types of supplies so that hopefully you can recreate this with whatever you have, or you can go ahead and recreate all 3 of these and play with different styles. So let's get started. I'm starting off by just sketching 3 shapes for my fish here. So the shapes for these fish are a little bit like an oval shape, but then it tapers at one end and then you're going to flare it out to make the tails. Then I also like to draw 2 fins on either side, and they also have a fin from the bottom, so for some of these I drew that kind of sticking out in the lower 1/3 of the fish. And I also like to draw a guideline going down the spine of the fish a little bit. They do have a fin there, but from the top view I don't always draw that, but I just like to have it there to show where my shadows should begin. I also like to make a note of where the eyes of the fish should be. It seems simple enough, but I have messed this up before, and since you're coloring it in with black, it's really hard to undo if you get it in the wrong placement, and it will look really derpy if you do. I'm going to be using 3 different types of materials today. So the first type of markers are my Tombow Dualbrush pen markers because they are blendable once you add water to them. The second one are Stabilo markers, which are water-based fine liners. And the third one is a watercolor ink pad. This is the Derwent Inktense paint pan. For all of these, I'll be using my water brush, which just dispenses water at an even flow. You can also just use a normal paintbrush with a jar of water if you want to do that as well. And since we're working with watercolor, I will be using watercolor paper. Mine is from Canson. I'm starting off with my Tombow Dualbrush pens, and I'm going to start scribbling in some color within my pencil outline. The set of brush pens that I have is the tropical set, so I actually don't have typical colors that are for koi fish like oranges and reds, but I wanted to do a really fun and colorful take on koi. I'm starting off with a pink marker because this is one of the lightest colors in my set. I like to start with the lightest color and build my colors up to the more vibrant or darker ones. So I'm just starting with this, and then I have a slightly darker shade of pink, and I'm going right on top of that lighter shade of pink without blending it out with water first. And then I also have a red, which I'm using to highlight some darker areas as well. I'm just really trying to fill in the shape of this fish, and then I'm going to bring in my water brush and start blending in that color that I've laid down. This is going to give me a good base to build off of, and you can see that even though I colored in 3 different colors all at once, the Tombow brush pens blend really easily, and it kind of gives you this nice shading ombre effect very easily without having to go in 3 different times with your different colors. I'm using my water brush to fade in some of those areas, but I also want to be sure to leave in some very well-defined lines in between the different colors because I think that gives you a more striking and graphic look. Then I'm going in with my darker colors. For this set, I actually don't have any like grays or blacks or any typical shadow colors, so I'm using these like blue teal colors to create these shadows. I typically do like to create shadows in my watercolor pieces like this, where instead of using just straight up black, I will take the color that's opposite of my main color on the color wheel, and when you mix those together, it creates a really nice muddy color that is great for shadows because it's not one-dimensional like black would be. So this works perfectly because blue and red are pretty close to being opposite on the color wheel, so I think that when you mix them together, it creates really nice natural looking shadows. I like to create a really nice shadow definition along the spine of the fish, so I'll just choose one side that I want to be darker and make sure I leave the other side of that spine or fin really light just to give it that nice contrast. And I also like to make the area that joins the fin and the body of the fish dark as well, which you can see on those 2 side fins, just because it really helps to delineate where the body of the fish and the fins meet. By the way, you can see on the side here I have this little clear stamp block that I use. I like to just scribble my marker or paint on there, and then I can add water to that and dilute it down when I need to instead of just going straight in with my marker on my page. This is really helpful for when I just want to go in with a lighter wash of color, or if I want to pre-blend colors before I bring them to my page. I also took my lightest color of teal blue and I used that also to create shadows for the lightest parts of my fish, which are basically white. So it's nice to have that little shadow of color just to define the edges of my fish without having to go in with a really bold outline. After I finish with my main painting and the shadowing and all of that, I'm going in with a very diluted wash of color. For this one, I'm doing my like blue teal color, loading it on my brush and just creating little speckly freckle areas in my fish just to make it look more realistic and spotted. Once I'm done with all of my painting, I'm going in with a black fine liner and just filling in little details. I'm coloring in the eyes of the fish, and I also added these little whiskers that they have. And then I decided that I also wanted to add some outline detailing, just a very sketchy look. I didn't want there to be really harsh, obvious lines, but I just thought that it would define the body of the fish. But you can totally skip this and just leave it without the pen marks as well. This isn't really a traditional color palette for koi, but I think it's a really fun take. Since there are so many different patterns for koi, you can really do whatever you want. And every single one that I've created so far has turned out great because there's no right or wrong for these. Moving on to koi number 2, and for this one I'm going to be using Stabilo fine liner pens. So these pens actually are not specifically meant to be used as watercolor pens. I feel like Tombows are marketed to be watercolor markers, but the Stabilo ones are not. But since they are water-based, I find that you are able to blend them out with a little bit of work. You just have to approach it a little bit differently. So here you can see I've laid down 3 different colors of my pens, yellow to orange to red, because I want to make a really nice gradient that will blend more easily. You can see how for this one I didn't go ahead and color in areas all over my entire fish. I'm sticking just to one part of the fish at a time. So for this, it's just the head for now, because I find that these pens do blend a little bit better when they're a little bit more fresh and wet on the page. If you go in and color in your entire fish and then wait like 10 minutes to try and add water, it might have dried down completely and it might be a little more difficult to blend. But you can see that since I did it all pretty quickly, it did blend pretty well. I find that I have a little more trouble with the lighter colors. So you can see the area in the middle of the head right there is a little bit patchy, but I'm gonna go in later and add more layers later on. I really wanted to do an option of a watercolor koi using markers like this that aren't marketed to be watercolor markers, because I really want to encourage you to look and see what you have, because you might have some supplies that you'd never thought of using in a different way, and it's always nice to figure out a different use for the things that you already have. So if you don't have these specific Stabilo markers, just look and see if you have another similar water-based type marker or pen, and just try it out and see if you can create some watercolor effects with those. So here I'm going in and continuing to work one area of the fish at a time. And instead of really trying to force these markers into being something that they're not, which is watercolor markers, I decided I would really try to work with their characteristics. The one thing that's great about these markers is that they're fine liners, so that you can go in and do some really nice detail work. So for this one, instead of doing a very loose watercolor styled koi, I'm gonna go in for a more defined and graphic style, because these markers are the perfect fit for that kind of style. So I'm going in and just drawing in some really cool patterns for these fish. Like I mentioned, koi comes in so many different patterns, so you can really just make it up as you go, or if you have trouble coming up with random patterns, you can always Google image search some koi and then find one that you want to replicate. And for this one, I am sticking to more traditional colors since I have them in this color palette of markers. So I'm sticking to oranges, yellows, reds, and blacks. I really like how striking all of the different colors are, and I like to leave a lot of my fish white as well, because I like there to be that bit of contrast to really make the colors stand out even more. So there's actually this one side of the fish that I kind of messed up, and then I tried to fix it by going in with my sand eraser, which I do a lot of the times to try and fix mistakes, but it just wasn't really working. It was pilling up the paper because there was too much water and ink on it. So what I ended up deciding to do is just going in with my black marker and kind of just coloring over it so that it looks like it's part of the pattern, and then you can't really see that there was a mistake there at all. So that's one tip. If you find that you mess up an area, just cover it up with a black pattern and no one will ever know. I am almost done with this koi here. My very last touch will be to add in my pen marks and also to add a tiny bit of shadow along the spine and fin down the middle of the fish. And you can see how that one tiny little shadow really makes a difference, and it turns this fish from a 2D thing to a very three-dimensional fish. So this is what the finished koi looks like. I really like the bold and intricate patterns on this one. Moving on to the third and last koi. For this one, I'm going to be using my Derwent Inktense paint pan. You can use any watercolor palette that you have. I just wanted to use this one because I really like that once your color is laid down, it doesn't get reactivated by more water. So I find that this really helps when I want to layer up color on my illustrations. You can see how I just pre-blended a couple of colors on my palette there, and for this one I do want to stick to a more traditional color palette again, but this one is going to be a more muted watercolor type of look. So I'm starting off with a really diluted wash of orange, and I'm filling in almost the entire fish here. And I'm just going to start building up color from there, going in with darker shades of orange and red, and creating different patterns, but also making sure to add shadow where the fish needs it. And it's pretty much the same drill from here. Again, I like to add a little bit of a darker color and shadow area to the fins, and then I'm just gonna have fun making different patterns. If you're working with a different watercolor palette that does get reactivated by water every time you layer, you will want to work more quickly because you don't want your colors blending in together, especially when you're working with black like this, because it could really just muddy your lighter colors and then you'll just end up with a big gray koi. Which I guess that's fine too, I'm sure there are gray koi out there as well, but that's just something to consider. I'm going to make sure I add a lot of little freckling and spotting areas on this fish. I think it works especially well when you're doing more of a watercolor washed out style like this one. Alrighty, so with the finishing touches on this last koi, we are all finished here. I really love how each and every one of these came out. You kind of can't choose what your favorite is because I feel like they're just completely different styles, so each one has its own purpose and place. But if you guys do have a favorite, let me know which one you like the most, and if you recreate any of these, please make sure to tag me on Instagram so that I can see all of your beautiful creations. I will be using these illustrations as a theme for my next bullet journal, so please make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date on that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!